Welcome to the Thriving Leaders podcast, where we dive into real conversations that help leaders grow, teams flourish, and organisations thrive. I'm your host, Claire Gray, Leadership and Team Facilitator at Thriving Culture. I'm also the author of Thriving Leaders, Learn the Skills to Lead Confidently, and Thriving Teams, When Teams Unite, Align and Achieve. This podcast is filled with practical tools, tips, actions and insights that you can immediately apply so you can lead confidently. I interview thought leaders from across the globe. I hope you enjoy the podcast. Today on the Thriving Leaders podcast, I'm delighted to welcome Jennifer Garvey Berger. Jennifer believes leadership is one of the most vital renewable resources in the world. And right now, in a time marked by uncertainty, complexity, and constant change, we need a new kind of leadership. Through her work, Jennifer helps leaders and organisations grow their capacity to think differently about how they approach strategy, people, and change. I first became familiar with Jennifer's work from my peers on an executive program I was a participant on at the Harvard Kennedy School a few years ago. I've since been a huge fan of her work on adult learning theory, complexity, change, and polarity management. So I'm super excited about the conversation today. So she's also the author of 4 highly acclaimed books, Changing on the Job, Simple Habits for Complex Times, Unlocking Leadership Mind Traps, and Unleash Your Complexity Genius, each with really practical ways leaders could be more successful and do more meaningful work. She's also the co-founder and CEO of Cultivating Leadership and holds both a master's and doctorate from Harvard. She now lives in the French countryside where she bought a house with a dozen friends who live in community, and they try to keep the dogs from terrifying the cats. So welcome, Jennifer, to the Thriving Leaders podcast.
Thank you so much for having me, Claire.
Awesome. So I know I've given a little bit of context, but for my listeners who aren't familiar with your background and your story, how do you describe what you do and why that matters so much right now?
Well, about almost 30 years ago, I fell in love with this question of how do humans get better able to handle complexity. And I've been investigating this question for my whole adult life. And when I started, it was like a little bit of a fringe question. Some leaders needed to handle complexity, and many leaders didn't have to handle that much complexity. And now it doesn't feel like a fringe question at all. Everybody, everywhere is handling quite a lot of complexity these days. And so it turns out that this thing that I happen to be interested in is incredibly important for leading today.
Yeah. So why does it feel like everything's so complex right now?
Because it actually is.
Yeah.
The world has always been really complex and unpredictable and enmeshed. Complexity is when you can't see what's coming, when the things that are creating the future are happening in many different places at once, and no one has their hand quite on the controls of what's going on. And right now, that is now, right? Things are changing from every direction. No one particularly has their hand on what's going to happen next. Change can come from anywhere and not just from like a single place. And even the people making the changes don't know what the changes will be. They're setting things into motion, but they don't know how that motion is going to interact with other motion and create the future.
Yeah, so much unknown ambiguity ahead of us. And I think that feels a bit scary for a lot of people.
Well, it's literally frightening to your nervous system when you don't know what's going to happen next.
Yeah. And I've been reflecting on this a little bit because I'm noticing more and more within organisations, because of all the complexity happening in the world with AI, not knowing what's going to happen with people's jobs, what's happening with fuel, what's happening with wars, the cost of living crisis, all these pressures, these external factors happening. And then we have our own internal pressures of just living life. It feels like within organisations, everyone's really kind of doubling down on their own patch and just putting their head down to get stuff done and not actually kind of looking at the bigger picture sometimes, because it feels too hard. It feels too complex, and it feels easier to create some certainty for ourselves. What are you noticing in the work that you're doing with organisations?
I mean, this is exactly the pattern, right? And it makes total sense because Complexity is experienced by the nervous system as a threat.
Yeah.
And so what do we do when we're under threat? We narrow our focus.
Mm.
We protect the things that are close in. We start to get very fear-oriented. We start to get very action-oriented. And so you find people doing a lot of activity right now that might not be a very helpful activity, but it's like active, making more, having their AIs make more, like all this activity that happens. And then you find people really losing sense of their big picture, what matters most to them, their organization's big picture, purpose, the future, because all that begins to disappear when you can't see what's coming.
Yeah. And I'm noticing that kind of busyness feels safe for people, like kind of just going into the stuff. So it feels like more purposeful for people as well. Yeah.
Yeah, it's what we can get our arms around.
Yeah. So, leaders often try to simplify the complexity or try to explain it to people, which is helpful to be able to understand the complexity around us. But when does that become unhelpful?
Well, it becomes unhelpful when it's dishonest. And that's the bind leaders are really in right now, is they need to be projecting some kind of message of hope, because people's nervous systems release, people feel more engaged, people feel more competent, they have a connection to their larger selves when they're not under conditions of threat and despair. And so leaders are trying to give their people hope, and at the same time they can assure them of almost nothing.
Yeah.
And that is a really tricky balance.
And so what do you recommend for leaders in terms of navigating the complexity with their people?
I just think the first thing leaders have to do is handle their own nervous systems and know what's going on for them. Because I'm seeing all these leaders right now who are triggered so significantly, and then they're trying from their own triggered place to bring kind of calm and reasonableness to an organization. And that is not ever going to work, because we communicate nervous system to nervous system. And so if you're freaking out and you're my boss, and then you tell me to be calm, my nervous system thinks, oh, wow, this is worse than I thought it was, because now you're freaking out and also like trying to soothe me in some unhelpful and untruthful way. Leaders really need to figure out what they can do that brings them hope, that brings them back to their purpose, and brings them back to their breath and their bodies in this moment, so that they can actually offer a hopeful, grounded presence before they ever say anything. In fact, before they ever walk into a room with other people, they need to just be constantly figuring out how to ground and reground.
Yeah. It's so interesting how people do feel that nervous system, that energy that people bring. Even you can use the right words when you're delivering a message, but it comes through in your tone of voice or your body language, or there's other ways that people feel that, in the system and what's happening between people too.
Yeah, the neocortex, which we think is kind of like our greatness, right? This executive functioning of the brain processes a tiny amount of the body's actual information. And we understand much more than words tell us. And I'm a researcher, and this kind of talk would have struck me many years ago as kind of woo-woo, like you have to be centered. And I went to Harvard, like we read books, like you know what I mean? Actually, the more physicians, neurologists, neuroscientists understand about the way the body works, the more we understand how critical it is to actually have your brain and your body aligned with each other before you begin leading, and what a critical leadership move that is.
So what shifted for you going kind of from that head to full body leadership? Like, what was the transitional realization you had?
One of my dear friends and business partners, Carolyn Coughlin, became aware of this shift much earlier than I did. And I co-edited a book on executive coaching in 2002. This is a long time ago. And one of the book was very well received. And one of the comments we got back then was we neglected the body in that book. And I thought, the body? What does the body have to do with coaching? I mean, I was bewildered by this comment.
Yeah.
And then Carolyn starts getting into it. And because of that, I start reading research and I start doing practice with myself and with my clients. And turns out it's not just a brain that your body carries around from meeting to meeting. Turns out this question of why is it I can say, as you said, I can say all the right things and still what people get from me is an entirely different message. That became very interesting to me as I started to work with CEOs who were saying all the right things and whose organizations were troubled by the things they were saying. And no speaking coach was being able to help them.
Yeah.
Because it wasn't a speaking issue. It was a being issue.
Yeah. It's an interesting one because I do think people talk more and more now about like the above the neck, below the neck sort of language. But sometimes in organizations, people do feel like that feels a little bit woo. How have you brought corporates or others along on this journey to understand that it's a whole person in terms of leadership?
You know, there's so much more coming out about the nervous system and how the nervous system works. And I think in a kind of a, I don't know, unhappy coincidence, leaders also feel it, right? They feel bad. And so when I used to go into executive teams and I would say, let's put our feet on the ground and actually breathe together, they would look at me sideways like, what? Like, this is my yoga class. This is my executive development, my team development experience. And now when we get to breathe together, people feel their bodies behave differently. They experience different thoughts. They can solve problems in different ways. And so I don't need to say very much about it. We just need to try it. And then people see it's incredibly effective. And I think one of the reasons they feel the difference so much is because their regular lives are so, so stressful for their bodies. And so anything that pulls them out of that incredibly reactive state, it feels very good indeed.
Yeah. You're giving me flashbacks to sort of 10, 12 years ago when I was working in a corporate role, sort of sitting on a leadership team in the people function. And I was going to do some centering grounding work, but it was within financial services. And I thought, oh, this is not going to land. And I pulled out with doing it, where it's something that I bring into a lot of the work that I do with leadership teams now, whether it's the breath, whether it's getting out in nature, like changing context, all those sorts of things I think are so important. And sometimes it feels like we're not doing the work, but that potentially is the work that needs to be done.
Yeah, you can't go farther if you haven't done that.
Yeah.
I was trying this in a law firm in Sydney some years ago. And I had said with this executive team, the managing directors of this firm, I had said to them, okay, so for our first 2 meetings, try this. And then we never have to do it again. Like, if it doesn't work for you, if it's too out there, we never have to do it again. And so we did it for the first 2 meetings. And then on the 3rd meeting, we came in and I said, okay, let's get right into it. And one of the partners said, wait, why aren't we breathing? This is the only place I ever breathe. And I realized that was actually kind of true.
Yeah.
Right? It was the only place they ever intentionally took a breath and experienced the alteration of the nervous system that intentional breath offers.
And I'm also hearing there's like some permission to be able to do that, to have that space to do that. And often we don't feel like we have permission because we're always doing the next thing or going into action mode. Yeah.
That's right. And that's where our bodies drive us under these times of great stress. That's where our bodies drive us.
Yeah. So, like with the complexity that's happening in the world, what are some strategies? You've talked about breath. Are there other strategies that a leader can focus on to help be effective?
Getting your body in order,
Mm-hmm.
dealing with your sleep, your movement, and your breathing. These things are absolutely mandatory right now. And it's at a time when people are giving up sleeping, moving, and breathing
Mm.
because, as you say, they're so busy. They don't have time for any of that. And that, for me, that's baseline. You simply cannot lead right now, except in the most kind of frantic short-term ways, fear-induced and inducing ways, unless you're on top of those things. And then once you are on top of those things, then I think you have to think about some other really fundamentally human experiences. Are we connecting with each other? Do we have genuine positive regard with each other? Are we laughing together? Because these things are not just, like it's super when my team's like that, but this is a serious time. These are actually the lubrication of human creativity. And right now, uh, machines are starting to eat into a ton of what used to be our work. And so, for better or for worse, and I don't know whether it's for better or for worse, uh,
Mm.
but for better or for worse, there are things we can put down, and there are things we have to pick up. And this question of how do we use our whole embodied human intelligence, this is what leaders have to be working on right now.
Mm. I completely agree because I do think that with AI coming in, or not coming in, it's here, and how we're augmenting teams and the work that we do, it's now more important that we connect, build relationships with the people that we're with, create psychological safety or positive intent and regard for what someone's saying so we can have healthy debate and make better decisions together. But we probably don't. I think AI is moving us in the opposite direction where we have less contact and less connection and less questioning or challenge because it's being done for us. What are you noticing in terms of some of the tensions that are happening within teams based on all this complexity?
I mean, teams do what you said earlier, and they get focused on me and my work,
Mm.
and they get less teamy, less collaborative,
Mm.
less creative because they're grinding. There are so many, I just hear the word grinding. I'm just grinding it out. I'm just grinding it out these days. It's just really busy right now, so I'm just grinding it out. This is not where our best work comes from.
Mm.
And this question of what's ours to do and how do we tap into those human capacities that require bodies and nervous systems to sync up. This requires the things that you're talking about. I've been talking a lot. I don't know. I'm not sure. I love Amy Edmondson's work on psychological safety. And the thing that I've been noticing is the world feels less and less safe all the time, psychologically and physically.
Yeah.
And so the question about how we create spaces of bravery and
Mm.
how leaders inspire these brave spaces is really on my mind right now.
Yeah.
Uh, which is what Amy talks about anyway. But psychological safety has often come to mean places where we're comfortable.
Mm.
And actually it's not comfortable right now. And so
No.
one of the big capacities for leaders to learn and then to support others to be in is the capacity for moving forward and being more in discomfort in a fuller way. And humans can do that. Like developmental theory says that's growable. Um, your nervous system doesn't like it, but nervous systems can be taught to be more expanded, to be less reactive. And so that's the work right now. That's the human work that's left to us is how can we engage? How can we disagree, use our judgment, think through things really well at a time when there's kind of a pretend version of that that's happening with AI, but that's not actually the human version of that.
Mm,
So how do we let the bots do what the bots do really well and let the humans do what the humans do really well?
yeah. It's so interesting because I feel like there's a common misconception that psychological safety is about being comfortable. And I think because of the complexity and the pressure that everyone's feeling, I feel like people are holding back more or being like, oh, well, what's the point in having that conversation? Okay, I'll just let that one slide or I won't, and I feel like people are leaning out rather than leaning in because they feel like there's already so much discomfort. Why would I cause more? But it's not, but it's more about getting to a better outcome. So, yeah, I find it quite an interesting time working with teams because of the reality of, yeah, they've got a lot of pressure and they're holding a lot at this point in time. And they also need to do the important work and have the challenging debates and discussions and work through some of the complexity too. And it's an interesting place to navigate to create that holding environment for people to be able to have those conversations.
I mean, it's kind of, I don't mean to sound naive here. It's kind of great, right? There's the pressures are so significant right now that first of all, it is very developmental. If we turn our minds to growing, like
Mm,
if development comes from some combination of challenge and support, challenge we've got.
yeah.
And a lot of the things that make our nervous system happy and that make us able to do great things, even in the face of really serious complexity, a lot of them are very pleasurable. Laughing,
Mm,
uh, connecting deeply with another person, as you said earlier, being in nature, these things are very pleasurable. Actually,
mm,
one tiny little signal, we had a webinar about implementing AI a few weeks ago, and we asked the couple hundred people who signed up, we asked them, what do you do to settle your nervous system? And I've asked this question, Carolyn and I wrote a book about this. I've asked this question to thousands and thousands of leaders. And I can tell you pretty generally that the first one involves the like number one response involves social connection.
mm,
I call a friend, I go for a walk, I talk to my partner, I um whatever,
mm.
right? This time it was like anything involving another human was like 10th on the list.
Oh, really? Interesting.
Crazy. I go for a walk by myself. I spend time alone. I write in my journal. I go for a run alone. Like the things that people were talking about were incredibly solitary experiences because I think that the decibel level of our lives is so high. People just want quiet. And they think quiet means alone. And this is a great opportunity for leaders and teams to help people understand that quiet doesn't need to mean alone, that we can be deep and we can be, roomy, spacious together. And if you can help people see that, the creativity, the loyalty, the possibility for these folks, I think is really extraordinary.
Mm. It's interesting. I wonder whether there's a shift in human need. Like always, we want to belong and we want that connection, but maybe that's shifting based on context. We do want to reflect and deeply reflect. So it's good that we're creating space for that. But it's interesting that we don't necessarily want to bring others into that. And I wonder whether there is so much noise. So we don't want to be sounding like we're complaining and contributing more to the noise that's out there. Yeah. What's your kind of theory behind the shift?
Yeah, I think you're exactly right. And there's a piece of me that wonders with AI, you can get something that feels a little bit like companionship, but
Mm,
that doesn't actually, it's not a nervous system to nervous system companionship. Don't get me wrong, Claude and I think super well together.
mm,
And um, and that thought process saves me just an an amazing amount of time. And so I rely on it now. But it's sort of like getting your calories from cotton candy, from candy floss, right? Like it doesn't actually do for your body what your body needs. And what your body needs is, sure, quiet and space and beauty, of course, but also connection for nervous systems to co-regulate together, for them to sync up and do what nervous systems have been doing in the human body since humans have existed. And so it is a great opportunity right now for teams to figure out, how do we make each other better? And it's not just a great opportunity, it's just mandatory, right? Like, because if we treat each other like robots, we will be replaced by them, because our work will degrade to the place where AI can do it for us. But if we tap into what makes us uniquely human, and we use our nervous systems on purpose, and we use our connection on purpose, we use our embodied intelligence on purpose, we use our capacity to be divergent together, often through human laughter and play, on purpose, suddenly you've got something that actually I don't think computers can get to, because it requires a nervous system and it requires the capacity to create. And teams have to figure out how to unleash that in each other.
So many different things are coming up for me. Today I was riffing with Claude from a business coaching perspective, and I was talking to it, and we're going backwards and forwards, working through some sort of strategy stuff and some business coaching stuff. And then I kind of hit a point where I was like, I've had enough. But I didn't say that. But Claude actually said to me, I think you need a break now. Da, da, da. And actually like called and I, like, it's like, we've already done this, this, and this. I think, and I was like, okay, I'm going to go out in the sunshine and have a break. But I was like, oh, wow, like the robot is telling me that I need a break. I was
My
like,
body needs a break.
Yeah. But also the other thing I was thinking about was geographically dispersed teams. And you talked about this syncing up that happens with our nervous systems. How does that work with geographically dispersed teams? Do you think we can do that online and through Teams or through online tools, or is it something that we need to physically be together to do?
Physically together is obviously better. And so this idea that we need to accomplish everything online, we all know from COVID that's problematic, right? We know from COVID that our nervous systems don't sync as well if we're not co-located. Another thing we know there's research about is actually the hearing each other's voices, like on a telephone or in a voice-to-voice place like a podcast, is actually much more connecting than the kind of mis-syncing that we get when our eyes see something and our bodies can't feel it so well. I just keep thinking about how troubling it is for my nervous system, these blurred or fake backgrounds and people moving and they lose an ear, or some of their hands kind of come in and out of the ether. I think my nervous system must be freaking out about that all the time.
Yeah.
But listening to each other's voices, catching the sound of breath, these things are very human. And I think you can absolutely do that virtually. If you focus on it, you can absolutely do that virtually. Is it as good as being in person? No. But I think you can get fairly close. And often when we're virtual, we get right down to it. There's no chitter chatter. There's no catching up. There's no waiting in line at the toilets or for the coffee machine where you just happen to say this or that. We need to have these spaces of emergence.
Yeah. Yeah, and because my team is geographically dispersed and we really create like that connection before we start any topic. Like we're really intentional with it. We've kind of built it into our rhythm and it makes such a difference. And it's supposed to be 5 minutes at the start of the meeting, but often it's 15 minutes because once we get talking, but we don't have all the incidental chit chat at the water cooler. Not that people have a water cooler, but anymore. So yeah, I think it's really important. And I also think the phone thing's also important too, because often, when I'm training leaders to give really effective feedback, I often find that people put off having a conversation until they're going to be face to face. And then it's like too much time's passed. And it's like, just pick up the phone and have a conversation, or whatever's going to have the best bandwidth. If a video call is really strong, do it on a video call, but just pick up the phone and have a conversation with someone, because the likelihood is you're not going to have the conversation if you keep putting it off for weeks and weeks.
Oh, we love to put stuff that we don't want to do off for whatever reason it might be. So in terms of feedback, in terms of actually having genuine relationships, this is what we're talking about, is how can we have genuine relationships? And we know that hundreds of years ago, people could have genuine relationships by letter carried by ship and by horse. We know that it's possible to have genuine relationships at a distance. But if you think of each other as robots, and you like get right to work and it's like very snappy, and then we're just marching through the agenda, a robot could probably do that better.
Yeah, but then where's the connection or the accountability or the
judgment or the creativity, right?
Yeah.
Like these things, or the care. One of the things that AI is unlikely to be able to do is care passionately about a purpose. Caring passionately about a purpose can get us to innovate, can get us to really consider wild and wonderful possibilities, and to create things that were impossible. I'm sure some human caring very deeply about AI has made this, many, many humans caring very deeply about AI is what makes this moment that we're in possible. So this question of deep caring is uniquely human, is ours.
Yeah. It's such an interesting time. So I'm really keen to dig into your work on polarity and polarity management, because that was one of the things when I went to Harvard. I did the art and practice of leadership development, which is about adaptive leadership. And like every second person was raving about Jennifer Garvey Berger. And so I was like, who is this woman? And so started doing all the research. And that's one of the things that I really, partly the complexity, but also the polarities and how you go about explaining what that is for a leader and holding polarities. Can you tell our listeners a little bit about polarity management and why it's so important?
Sure. It's so vital right now. This is not my idea. The person I learned it from was Barry Johnston, but there are great people. It's Barry Johnson, but there are great people doing this work now. It's this notion that very often, particularly when we're dealing with something complex, we choose a good. We choose something that's good. And what we don't notice is that on the other side of that good, it's not a bad, it's another good. And so we over-index on the one thing that we've chosen. And when we do that, we get a lot of the downsides of that thing. So like right now, the most common polarity people are talking about, they call it artificial intelligence, right? And artificial intelligence obviously exists in a polarity with human or embodied intelligence. And nobody talked about human intelligence before artificial intelligence came in, because it was just intelligence, right? Like when you had an IQ test, they didn't call it an HIQ test, right? Like it was just intelligence. That's what people talked about, because there wasn't another option. Now there's this other option. And so now we have to figure out, how do both of those options work together instead of just solving for the one? Because when we just solve for the one, we get the upsides of that one, but then we get the downsides of the overuse of that one. And if we solve for the both, then we can get the upsides of both of them with a little bit of the downsides, because polarities are always in a dynamic tension with each other. But otherwise, we get what I'm seeing in many organizations is that bringing in artificial intelligence and trying to solve for it and trying to build your organizations around it is actually pulling people into the downside of using artificial intelligence, which can make people less thoughtful, more active, but producing lower quality things. It can reduce judgment. And it's pulling us into the downside of human intelligence, where, bad things happen. We get self-protective. We get a little bit manipulative. We get like a little diabolical in our use of our intelligence to scheme and get our own way. And then you can get both of the downsides of both of the things, which is a pretty crappy world.
Yeah. And because like we see it all the time, these polarities, and I think we kind of tend to lean one way or the other. Like, it's like a centralized model versus a decentralized model, or even like executing strategy versus business as usual. Right? And it's kind of not an either or. Like, it's like, how do you actually create the end, and what does an end look like for a team or for a business unit or even an organization? And yeah, it's just interesting because we tend to, I guess, lean hard one way or the other. And what do you think, why does the human condition do that?
We like clarity.
Yeah.
Right. And so we lean hard one way or the other. And we like to buddy up. We feel a sense of belonging when we're around other people who believe what we believe.
Mm-hmm.
And we feel a sense of belonging when we can polarize against another group.
Mm.
And polarities offer us this great chance to do that.
Yeah,
Right.
the us and them.
If it gives us a nice us and them category, we can feel righteous. And because there always is an upside to the thing we want and a downside to the thing they want, we can always be arguing with facts. Of course, there's an upside to the thing they want and a downside to the thing we want, which we mostly ignore. But we can argue our side with facts, and then they can argue their side with facts. And that can go on basically forever. You see it everywhere right now, in political systems, in organizations, in the way people are even thinking about teams and teaming. Should we be mostly in person or virtual? The answer is yes. Should we be mostly AI or mostly human? The answer is we should have both of these things, right? Should we focus on getting work done today or thinking about the future? Yes. Yes, you should do both of those things. And so understanding and talking about the whole thing instead of understanding and talking about just your favorite piece is necessary.
Yeah. And it's interesting because whether it's within a team that might have different functions or views, or to get work done, you need cross-functional collaboration between teams. And that's often where there's the us and them tension of we're doing our bit, they're not, or we're right, they're wrong as well. How do you find polarity management helping with cross-functional collaboration?
Just talking about it is completely transformational.
Yeah.
I did a map once with a cross-functional team. It was a sales team in a big tech organization and super successful team that the leader had a sense, relatively new leader in that team, very senior group. The leader had the sense that even though the team was so high performing, there was something not at all right with this team she had just stepped into. And so we mapped this polarity of collaboration and competition. And the kind of customer facing sales folks were all like, go, go, go competition. They love competition. It was making them better. They were like, this winning is my everything, and I have to compete to win. And all of the people in non-customer facing roles, the people who were making the team possible, making the business possible, they were all in the downside, feeling like they couldn't do their jobs at all, and like they actually hated coming to work. And as that team looked at itself arrayed physically on a map, they had a conversation that they had really been longing to have for quite some time, and were able to understand for the first time, this thing that I love actually makes your life awful, and eventually it's going to kill the productivity of the team. It's like right on the edge of killing the productivity of the team, at which point I can't do the thing I love anymore. And so I need to stretch in a way that I never considered stretching. And you need to get something that you had not been able to get. And that team put that map on the wall, they checked it at meetings, and they transformed. And they became a place where they really could take advantage of the best everybody had to bring, which is the point of a team anyway.
Mm. I notice that I'm going to simplify the language because every team's different, but it happens a lot within organizations with like the service delivery function, whether that's sales or whatever the service delivery, and then the support functions. And it's almost like the service delivery is superior because they're with the client, customer, whatever it is the business does, and the support function just supports them to get the work done. And there's always this tension on polarity that happens, or the push and pull. How does one navigate that conversation? Like you said, that doing that mapping around the polarities is really useful, but how do we start that conversation if you're a leader of a business where that is a polarity?
I think noticing tensions, one of
Mm,
leaders' jobs is to either notice tensions or create the conditions for people to raise tensions.
yeah.
Because often the leader doesn't notice them because the leader's so firmly on one side.
Mm,
And attention is when I think that something obvious should happen and it's not happening. Like that's attention.
mm,
And often what leaders do is they push to make their thing happen, which is one of the things we think of as leadership, right? Pushing to make your thing happen. And if you're pushing and it's not happening, the kind of normal thing to do is to double down. I think anytime you experience yourself as doubling down right now, you need to stop. You need to stop and think because the automatic human response to difficulty is doubling down. And right now is not the moment of doubling down. Right now is the moment of curiosity and trying to think, what is going on here? I don't need to work harder. And I don't need to be doing the things I did before that seemed effective, but they're not effective anymore. I need to be changing. And so finding tensions, finding areas where people are doubling down, finding problems that keep popping their heads up even when you think you've solved them. These are great places to look for polarities. And then to just ask yourself, is the good thing I'm doubling down to get, or the good change I'm trying to make, is there an opposite good thing that is an interdependent good thing? These things create each other that I can't actually do without, that I can't, that I might not even want to solve away. And then how do I have that conversation with my team? And polarity management is just as it's just such a straightforward human technology for having a great conversation. And more we're going to need these human technologies for having a great conversation because the stuff that doesn't require human technologies, again, your computer can do them.
yeah. I love bringing together the divergent views, but also realizing the dependency that we have on each other. Because I do think in the times where there is the tension or the friction or the between people, teams, systems, whatever it might be, it's often because we do depend on each other, but we maybe either don't want to admit it or we get so frustrated because of our bit of the puzzle. And naming those things, I think, is so critical.
Naming those things is so life-giving,
Mm,
right? At first, it feels unpleasant because every time we have to admit that we can't do it ourselves,
mm,
particularly an amped up nervous system is scared.
yeah.
That I require you is scary because what if
Mm,
you aren't there for me? What if something happens, right? That it's a scary thing to rely on some other human.
mm,
And at the same time, it's the best. It's the way we've evolved to need each other. We've
mm,
evolved to require other humans and nervous systems. The reason we are able to live the lives we lead is because so much of our brain and body is devoted to other humans, to mirroring them, to figuring them out, to actually feeling them in our own bodies. Like if somebody cuts themselves across the table from you, your hand hurts. Your body reacts. Why? Because our minds have developed, our embodied intelligence connects us and we require each other. And knowing that we require each other is actually one of the most liberating and pleasant discoveries ever, because it means it's not all on your shoulders. And it
Mm.
means that working on our connection is a business imperative. And it turns out to be very pleasant.
Mm. Well, it is really enjoyable when you do the deep work. You show vulnerability, you share the impact others have had on you. All those things is what builds that connection. But when our nervous system, like you've said, is heightened, it feels scary or fearful sometimes to do those things.
And when we feel afraid, we get busy.
Mm.
I think, people ask each other, how are you doing? And what people often say is, I'm just so busy. It's just so busy. A million things on. I can feel it in my own nervous system. It's like I I'm going all the time. I feel the amping up of my own like sense of busyness.
Mm.
And I think what we don't realize is what we're really saying is I'm afraid. The
Mm.
world is frightening, and my busyness is my response to a frightening world. I'm afraid I won't have a job. I don't know what my children are going to do. I don't know what the geopolitical world is going to offer. I'm afraid of all the things.
Mm.
And so what do? Like I produce another PowerPoint deck,
Mm.
right? I write another paper justifying this or that. Like these these are the modern responses to threat.
Mm.
Instead of I deepen my relationship with my team,
Mm.
I find things to really like about somebody on my team who generally pisses me off. I work on my own embodied experience.
Mm.
All these things feel like I have to slow down, I have to take time, they feel like extras, but actually they're the real meal. That's
Mm.
the real thing that we're called to do right now.
Yeah. Hearing you say that, it makes me think that as a leader, observing someone, like observing your team going through change, that must be really challenging because the team members that are doubling down on doing the work to get stuff done because they're avoiding looking to the future, that might appear at face value like, oh, they're on board with the change, but actually that could be a fear response as well. And so there's almost this polarity in terms of how people are going to respond to change.
Oh, for
And
sure.
what we observe is often what we think is good performance and good, productivity because people are busy, but are they actually focused on the right things?
Yeah, and are they doing activities in order to protect themselves,
Mm.
knowingly or unknowingly? Or are they actually engaged with the creation, the co-creation of the future? That's what
Mm.
you need. You need team members who are engaged in the co-creation of what's next. There's no leader anywhere who knows what's happening next. It's impossible to know what's happening next. And so anybody who tells you that they know what's happening next, um, they're deluded. Like, they, there's no one steering. And so all of us have to be sensing and responding thoughtfully, carefully, sensibly with our full capacity, our full kind of toe to top leadership, and our full interconnectedness with other humans. That's the only way to handle right now because
Mm.
we can't handle it the ways we've handled life before. It's different now.
Yeah. And even having the confidence to say, hey, I don't know. What I do know is this, but I don't know this, or this. And that takes some vulnerability too.
That's right.
So, Jennifer, if you could leave us with one message about thriving teams, what would that be?
I think thriving teams actually have some kind of personal engagement and liking of each other. We often think that liking each other is like a cool thing when it happens. And actually, thriving teams go out of their way to like each other, to create the conditions for genuinely enjoying each other's company. And if you're on a team where that's not the case, the question is, how do you create those conditions? Not just for saying the hard thing, but for really understanding each other and thinking, these are kind of cool people.
Yeah. And it's interesting, I'm about to work with a team and they've got such different personality styles and they've all sort of shared their differences. And it's like, well, how do we actually understand and value our similarities and differences? And I think you're someone who's obviously embodied that because you're living with your friends that you also work with. So you've taken the whole liking the people you work with to the whole next level.
It is I was with a new leadership team last week, and the chief executive at dinner said, I've decided that the way we're going to really make it work is we're going to buy a big house in France and we're all going to move in together. It's not a commonplace answer.
Yeah. Oh, I love it. Well, Jennifer, thank you so much for the discussion. I really, really enjoyed our chat. Thanks for coming on the Thriving Leaders podcast.
Thanks so much, Claire.
I love this conversation with Jennifer. We could have talked for hours. I've really been reflecting on this reframe about busyness and the link to our nervous system. I actually see it a lot in myself. And when I go into that busyness cycle, is it a fear response? Like, what am I avoiding? It's such a useful lens to observe in your teams when they're going through change, but also in yourself. I'm using polarity management more and more with leaders and teams. It's such a great way to describe the tensions that we're holding right now and how we might have to manage those tensions. I also really loved her closing message about thriving teams. They go out of their way to genuinely like each other. They don't fall into liking each other, they choose it. They create the conditions for it. It was such a great chat. Hopefully you got as much value as I did. Thanks for joining us at the Thriving Leaders podcast. If you'd like to find out more about our leadership programs, facilitation, keynote speaking, or executive or team coaching, head to our website, www.thrivingculture.com.au. This is also where you can sign up for our newsletter, where I share useful tips on leadership and team development, as well as our podcast. You can also grab a copy of either of my books on our website, and it's also available on all good online retailers, including Audible, Spotify, and Kindle. If you like this episode, I'd be so grateful if you left a 5-star review, as it helps us reach more people and therefore helps more leaders thrive. Please subscribe.